Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Okay. Welcome again to the 4th annual Coleridge convening. My name is David Ramsey, and I'm a member of the Coleridge Board of Directors. First of all, I want to thank Ahu and Jessica for asking me to moderate this esteemed panel titled Building Bridges for Data to Impact Transformative Scaling and Funding Initiatives, where our expert panelists here will discuss, among other things, the collaborations they've used across state lines, the challenges involved in that, and scaling across state lines. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Starting to my immediate left, the very recent award winner, George Putnam, PhD, also recently retired from the Illinois Department of Employment Security, where he worked in the labor market information field for more than 30 years, serving as LMI Director and Chief Economic Analysis. Working in this industry for 30 years, you got to give him another round of applause for that. He continues to work as a labor market consultant to IDES. His recent initiatives have been establishing interagency and regional data collaboratives for the use of administrative data and statistical research. More specifically, his work has focused on understanding the progression of unemployment to reemployment, developing measures of unemployment insurance claimant behavior, and linking workforce outcomes to training and education. Our panelist in the middle, Robert Magoo, has worked in public sector data management and analytics for 23 years and currently serves as the Chief Data Officer of the state of Arkansas. He and the Arkansas Data Office, or AR Data, are responsible for state shared service data infrastructure, facilitating longitudinal evaluation and research, and enhancing Arkansas's capacity to use data to improve policy, practice, and outcomes. And our last but not least panelist is Stephanie Walsh, PhD, who I'm partial to because she's from New Jersey and I'm from New Jersey, is the Assistant Director of Research at the Helgett Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers University. She earned her doctorate in planning and public policy at Rutgers University, focused on the accessibility of public benefits. Stephanie also serves as the Director of the New Jersey statewide data system, overseeing the governance, research agenda, and publications that use the linked longitudinal data. Her research interests focus on how data can inform public programs and policies to better support service delivery and improve individual outcomes. So without further ado, you guys ready? Okay. So our first question, could you please provide a brief overview or summary of the projects you're pursuing at your respective agencies, and in what innovative ways are you leveraging the ADRF to move the needle on cross-state collaboration? I'm going to start with our award winner, George Putnam.
Well, I think I'd start by first saying that over the 30 years that I've been involved in LMI, states have, in fact, been working with one another on things such as interstate labor market areas or worker flows from one state to the next. But what is dramatically different now than before is the broad scope of what states do with one another. And I attribute that to a few kind of recent innovations. And one of those is what Ahu mentioned this morning, a threefold increase in the number of workspaces, project spaces in the ADRF that partners are now using. The ADRF provides a safe, secure environment where states' de-identified data can reside and to be used for this expanded scope. So I would say that has been critical. Second, and this may be more of a reflection of the particular projects that I've been involved in. USDOL, ETA, put out a solicitation on UI equity grants. 5 states, while submitting as individual grantees, actually used common language. So you have a situation where now states are able to collaborate on federal grants, even though they are submitting as individual grantees. The activity itself, there's a core that they share with one another. And so Stephanie's been very much involved in that. So we've created a workspace where those 5 states are actually developing and sharing code for that grant activity. And I would say that a third major way in which that needle has moved is the Midwest states have established an RFI process, a structured RFI process, so that states can partner with external entities. And I think there's a recognition in that the external entities bring a skill set that is absolutely critical to the endeavor of what we're doing. That is really good. And so I think that bringing in these external partners, and the comment that I made earlier this morning about an invitation to our federal partners and the philanthropic organizations to participate as a part of Project Team will actually expand that skill set in important ways.
Excellent. Robert?
Yes, thank you. I think we're working on a lot of projects, but the one I think is most relevant to scalable data use, and we is a big way because it's supported initially by the DOL ETA and building on work of a lot of states and federal agencies is the Evaluating Enrollment to Employment Pathways program. So this is a set of 5 applied data analytics training programs that span WIOA, SNAP, TANF, registered apprenticeships, post-secondary education, all on a scalable, layered, plug-and-play data model. So there are currently 25 states and growing that are participating in that, and usually each state team has at least 3 departments participating. So it's helping to facilitate intra-state, cross-departmental collaboration and sharing. It's helping to kind of prove and Arkansas brought the data to this. So states that do not yet have data in the ADRF, it's helping them to show to their stakeholders, this is what we could do, products of value if we were to share these data. And we're trying to build a reusable data foundation so that we've had 9 amazing projects finished. There's 18 more starting or in progress all through these 25 states. And because of this interoperable foundation built on federal standards and data files, which we all presumably already have, it should make it easy to adopt and build and collaboratively develop and scale new products. And then we're going to continue that on with IAS SLDS, bringing in SEDS and some other things. So the model is designed so that we can bring in essentially any program and without having to disrupt the data model.
So New Jersey has been getting into collaboration in the ADRF in basically any way that we're able to, or joining on to all of the big projects that they have going on. So we're working to expand the multi-state post-secondary report, which has been a great effort of bringing on some new states and expanding some of the measures included in that, developing a new model where we're really building kind of the pathways for these data sharing agreements within between different states to really have all their data in one place. So not just sharing the code, but really collaborating in a meaningful way of standardizing the data across the states and working together to improve existing products. So, that's where we see kind of the most value in this collaboration within the ADRF in particular, is being able to, build on products that have already existed, bring our products to the table, and allow researchers in other states to improve upon what we've already done so that we can then take that back and have a improved product for ourselves, as well as sharing the code that we've developed so that other states are able to build upon the work we have already done in their states. So we're in the multi-state post-secondary report. We're also in the UI equity grant that George mentioned. So getting to all work in the same space, I think, and again, as George mentioned, that capacity, the infrastructure that Coleridge has built within the ADRF makes everything a lot easier. So when we're talking about the potential for data sharing, there's so many different on-ramps and security mechanisms in place that really make that conversation simple. When we're bringing the value proposition to our partners, we can say, you can have tiered access, you can have approved users, we can turn off use whenever you want. You're the ones that get to approve any products that are going into the space, any use of the data, you can track who's using it. That makes the conversation a lot easier, and before we were in the ADRF, having those conversations was a little bit difficult, especially with new agencies or new state partners. So we've been really grateful for having that infrastructure to do that. And then again, just building on the capacity of what we're able to do. We're a relatively small shop in New Jersey, and having the expertise and experience from other states to build on our work and bring these new ideas to us and allow us to collaborate has really been impactful for what we're able to do.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. I definitely want to get back to the point you started to talk about the value proposition, but I want to tug on the collaboration thread a bit more. How much of the collaboration work you've done has been kind of out of necessity? And when I say that, specifically I'm speaking of like how states and agencies had to respond to workforce initiatives like during the pandemic, for instance. A lot of states had to modernize their UI infrastructure to make sure they could respond appropriately to things that were happening. So can you speak to that a little bit? What's been out of necessity? What's been, I don't think we would call anything a nice to have, but what's been those things that you've kind of been mandated to do, and kind of those things that have been, just great to do as far as, the public good? I'll start with Stephanie.
So I would say none of the work that we've gotten into was for purely selfless reasons. It was all because we really wanted the data and expertise of the other states that were participating. So really out of necessity in New Jersey, we got into this work, we helped form the Eastern States Collaborative because we saw so much movement between our state borders for those who were bordering us. So we're a top exporter of post-secondary students. We have huge number of migration for workers in and out of the state. So when we're talking about our higher education outcomes dashboard, we're looking at 60% employment rates of students for certain institutions, and we know that 40% of people aren't unemployed when they finish the programs. A lot of them are going on to move out of state and work in other states, but we don't know that because they fall out of our system. And that's true of every report we do in terms of data limitations, but also in terms of the technical capacity that, again, we have. Every time we run into an issue around ID matching or disclosure and how we're doing it, we can reach out to the other states who are involved in this work, and everybody's been so helpful and happy to share that information with us. So to that extent, I would say it is definitely out of necessity, but in terms of the kind of interest and just engagement that we've been able to collaborate around, now that that infrastructure is in place for collaboration, it's also out of interest. We hear these policy topics that we have heard in our own state coming up in other states, and so I guess that's kind of out of necessity too, that we have to respond to those policy interests, but it's really been engaging and exciting for us to get into those different products as well.
And I would mirror that we're driven by necessity. These are all things we need to do anyway. Our kind of key drivers are the problems in our state. We're trying to work on, we lead the nation in food insecurity. We're thinking about labor force participation. We're thinking about unemployment insurance exhaustion, educational attainment. So to answer these questions with data and evidence, we have to do these things, but there's no reason we have to do 50 plus versions of these same things. And so we've received a lot of benefit in our state of learning from this growing community of practice from others who have already faced the same challenges, who's leading in those things, and then hopefully contributing back some of our own innovations and values. So it's just helping us do what we should be doing, mission-driven anyway, by necessity, but with more efficiency and effectiveness, and spending more of our very limited resources on value-added activities.
I would agree with Robert's comment about the focus, at least in my world over the 30 years, has always been on necessity, not nice to have. But I'd like to go back to the comment that was made this morning about keeping a focus on the people. In the particular area that I've been working on for some time, it's the claimant and the claimant's experience in the UI system. So almost claim it as a user instead of thinking about a process that becomes quite separate from the individual, to be thinking of how does the individual engage the process. And so a lot of my thinking and the way that I approach upper level management and decision making and resource allocation has been through the scope of the people impact and the necessity of that.
Absolutely. So I assume, when you talk about claimant experience, how we can, meet users where they are and be able to serve them better. Right. Excellent. So that's a great segue to our second question, which is, what have been your key strategies in championing the value or the value proposition of this type of collaboration? And from my experience in state government, there has to be kind of a continuous education, like with your partners, especially those who are not kind of steeped in data or steeped in the world that you're in. Those could be internal partners or funders or external partners. So again, what have been your kind of key strategies in, explaining the value proposition for partners? We can start with George. Should be.
I think it is. I think one of the strengths of the multi-state data collaborative and of our partnership with NASWA and with Coleridge has been a clarity of what we're doing together. And that has taken the form, more than anything, of what I would describe as sort of a structural impetus. We've talked about going from project to product to practice, and those aren't sort of empty words or buckets, but rather it's very much the line of conversation and dialogue that happens between Stephanie, Robert, myself, and all of you. And I would add to that the importance of being able to scale from a practice to this wider community of practitioners. That's been really critical. And so the value proposition that I always go back to, and many of you have heard this ad nauseum, is the production of actionable information. Is it relevant? Is it timely? And is it local? If resource allocation decisions are being made locally, we need to be able to articulate our information so that it can be used at that level. It is not helpful to provide information that's 2 or 3 years in arrears for making timely decisions. and relevance gets back at the people angle. A lot of what drove the initial project on the unemployment to reemployment portal was understanding that we needed to move the conversation from claims to the claimant and from volume of claims to claimant behavior. And so that the production of actionable information is where I go back to repeatedly on that value proposition.
Great, thank you for that. So I'm gonna throw you a little curveball. In addition to that, I think, what I heard and what George just said is that there's also an opportunity to, when we're speaking to our funders or those who approve our budget, that there's an opportunity here to be more efficient or save money or make sure we're using limited resources and public resources in the best way possible. So can you speak to that as well when you're talking about your value proposition conversation?
Yes, and Jennifer talked this morning about demonstrating need for data, piloting solutions, and improving public systems at scale. And I think that's exactly what we're doing here. But I think it's also, we've kind of learned along the way not to try to go to our stakeholders and try to get them to understand tiered access and record linkage and all these types of things. They do need to know about the sort of balance between risk and utility and how we can find a way to do things, safely, securely, with compliance. We've almost adopted sort of like a magic box concept. Like, we're happy to talk about like what happens under the covers, but we really try to meet with our legislators, our governor's office, our secretaries, and really understand their policy needs. I guess recently, last week, we had an executive order on maternal health improvements, including data analytics and infrastructure. And so as I met with those secretaries, I pretty much kind of put it in their terms with the executive order, with what we have to do, and explaining, at a high level, not how we're going to do it, but here's what we can do to assist in their business terms. And I think over time, that's kind of proven out how we can quickly meet their needs, efficiently meet their needs, effectively meet their needs. And we're building that state capacity by bringing individuals within the different departments through the ABA training, so they all have a common vocabulary. They're building that community practice within the state and across states, because their closest peer that does what they do might be in another state. And as far as using our state resources effectively to facilitate that, a lot of that is through blending and braiding of funding under a statewide cost allocation plan, so that we're leveraging economies of scale.
Great, thank you for that. So what I'm also hearing is that, in having those conversations, that it also depends on who your audience is, right? The value proposition is different depending on who you're speaking to and who your audience is. Stephanie.
So I think one thing that the Coleridge Initiative, DDC, and all the collaboratives have done really well through the many Ps of how they're developing this is going from those priorities to products to policy. And particularly in doing that, showcasing those products. So one thing that's been really helpful for us in making those value propositions is having a product we can point to when we say something like, look at the gaps in the limitations of our in-state data system, but look at what we could do because Kentucky has already done this and they have this beautiful dashboard that we can show you as we're having this conversation. That has been super helpful in us being able to say, it's already developed. We could and they're happy to share their code and work with us to develop it for ourselves. Having that on board to the product that we know is what we want and what kind of resolves some of the issues that we have within our state has made those conversations really easy with our stakeholders. And then, depending on the audience that we're speaking to, we can point to the many different products now that there have been so many different sectors and different topics involved in the collaborations, but also just speaking to the foundation of what has been built and how we can start to bring in new products for that work. So it's not just the few heavy hitters that we always talk about with the collaboration, but there's a lot of new really interesting work being done by the various partners who are collaborating that we can just speak to those products or the potential for the infrastructure that's built now.
Great, thank you for that. How often is it the conversation, I'm speaking to the researchers in the room, how often is it the conversation that as a researcher, this topic is important, so I want to educate, my funders about trying to get this work funded, as opposed to I know that the approvers in my state agency, this is their priority, so I want to bring, something to them that's going to address that priority, which is kind of a different way of having the conversation. Can you speak to that a little bit, and is that kind of your experience that you have to come to that conversation in different ways?
So in our experience, I guess it depends on the topic. So in some cases, and it really is, David, as you know, because you've built the foundation of the system in New Jersey, we have a pretty great partnership and great partners that we're working with. So it really is this collaborative experience within our state to develop the research agenda and the products that we work on, where we can bring ideas to them because we know that they're really interesting, they're gaining a lot of support, there's national attention around them, or we hear from them that this is something that's being talked a lot about within our department and we really want to figure out a product to move forward around this. So I think it really depends on the topic area, and I think we've mostly been responsive to the policymakers and agency staff needs within New Jersey, but certainly there are cases where there's just a lot of interest amongst our staff, and we're really excited about a product that's in development and happy to participate in that.
In Arkansas, similar to New Jersey, we spent a lot of time talking to various stakeholders to kind of understand that learning agenda and looking for commonalities, and then kind of, even if we don't have the data right now, even if we don't have the funding now, we need to understand where the gaps are, what the needs are. And then we kind of work with them to prioritize, okay, what's that next piece that's going to deliver the most value for everyone? And everything's important, but sometimes things are more urgent, or there's just a normal order of operations. And we try to break it down so we're not building silos. We're figuring out what are those kind of stackable, interoperable modules, and then we'll kind of be looking for what are the, what's that next piece that's going to help us the most, and using braided funding to get there, trying to maximize the use of our federal funding to those braided funding strategies, or then if there's really a gap, that's where we might talk to our philanthropic partners about, this is really a gap, this is a barrier right now, and this is what would be most helpful to move us that next level.
Great.
I think my experience is similar to Stephanie and to Robert, and that is it's been ad hoc. And I'd like to encourage us to move away from that to a more structured and intentional partnership, so that I think it is the case that there are areas of significant expertise that reside in that funding circle that could inform well what we do as a practice. And so how do we capture that in a very structured and intentional way? Kind of moving, much like Robert was saying, we've lived in silos for so long, it's hard for us to see outside of that. But I think as well, that silo has had implications for roles that have limited what it is that we could and should be doing. So I think there's a couple different layers to be thinking about in terms of where partnerships could be headed.
Great, thank you for that. What is your advice for states who want to leverage your funding strategies both for the creation and scaling of the collaborative work we've been talking about? So whether that's a state-launched student data system, workforce data quality initiative, or any of the work you've been doing. Why don't we start with Robert? We can change it up a little bit.
Step one, read Kathy Stack's paper on braided funding for sustainable data infrastructure, and just learn more about braided funding strategies. And I know it's not fun to read about federal cost accounting principles, but it's helpful to understand that because we have to know the barriers, because I think a lot of times funding silos build information silos. And so we need to kind of do our root cause analysis and start there. But we're allowed to use statewide cost allocation plans. We're allowed to do this. We just have to have our accounting correct and really understand the federal principles there with what can and can't be done. And having having conversations with our federal partners about what we're doing. Because there's many great programs. It's like we're using the Workforce Data Quality Initiative, we're using IISSLDS, we're using Justice Reinvestment Initiative and others, and that could have easily been multiple different bigger silos. So I think the important thing is having that conversation at the state level of having a holistic strategy and thinking about the full system and leveraging them all together so that we get that complete common operating picture with that tiered access for all of the different user personas.
Great. Stephanie?
So, I would say think creatively about how you're funding things. I'll steal probably George's example of the UI equity grant proposal that we put in that he mentioned, where each state had the same task. So we shared the exact language for separate proposals or submissions for this federal grant, where we can then come together, use the funding to develop this joint collaborative work that we're doing. And again, this work really speaks to the value of the collaboration where we're developing these national measures that we all really care about together and using different state data to really inform those. And that's something we've done in the past too. So with SLDS grants, we've worked with other states to all put in the same shared language through a specific task. We could do that for WEQI grants. There are a lot of funding opportunities where we could come together. So we don't just have to collaborate on products and projects, but thinking about the proposals, we all know about different funding opportunities. We all have different grant experiences. So bringing that to the table as well and saying, I know that this funder would be really interested in this collaborative work. Let's all submit a shared proposal or separate proposals that have this shared component where we can then, at least for that component of the task, have a funded operation around a shared goal.
Okay. Can you also speak to, and now we can go back to George, speak to kind of the practical challenges in trying to get funding, right? So I know working in New Jersey state government, we had the benefit of having a workforce development institute at the Helmut Center who could help us go after this funding and do the things we want to do. But a lot of state agencies, you may not have the capacity to do that. So can you kind of speak to maybe the benefits also of, working with your state university or maybe working with other agencies who have, a grant funder or someone who has the capacity to go out and help you get this funding? George, you want to take that one?
I think for us, what has been instrumental has been the construct of the RFI process. Not only bringing in that external entity expertise, but also the funding capability. I mean, that is on the RFI. Where's the cash coming from? To the external funder. And so we're trying to leverage that because our world has limitations, state government. And funding is one of them. And so I think what we look to is these structured external partnerships.
Excellent. And I think a thread that's been running through kind of some of the comments here is that gatherings like these are really important to help break down those silos and the collaborations we're talking about. So credit to Coleridge. Let's continue to have these meetings and be able to break down those silos. So here's the $1 million question. The session following lunch includes a focus on federal and philanthropic panels. What would be your advice to both the federal agencies and philanthropic organizations to fund these important collaborative capacity building efforts? And we have a captive audience for you of federal and philanthropic representatives here. So here's your chance to really tell them how you feel. We'll start with Robert. Sorry to put you on the spot. Go get him, Robert.
There's been a ton of really good support, and we've been able to use it to great effect, but it's a lot of effort on it brings a lot of complexity to the states to make sure that we're leveraging all these opportunities, and a lot of them you can't get two in a row, the feast or famine, and grants are usually intended to kind of innovate and stand up the new thing while you still have to be running the old thing. And it's a lot of work to figure out the sustainability strategies. So I think working to have more clarity around sustained federal funding for data infrastructure, which may already be there, but it's not clear on how you can do that. Because we're probably already spending more than it would take. We're just doing it redundantly. So it just having that clarity around federal cost accounting principles, around varieties of funds, DOL and DOE have been really good about putting out joint guidance, and I think, but particularly now with the big infrastructure funds and things like that, more resources coming out, very clear actionable guidance on how we can and should be doing that, and that it's, A, that it's allowable, and B, ideally, if it's encouraged to be working together on those resources, and that, particularly infrastructure projects, it's also building, workforce, that's building workforce data infrastructure as part of that. I'd say also for the federal agencies, just sharing of data, because states can be spending money to kind of replicate efforts for data that's already available at the federal level, and we spend a lot of time just trying to figure out where our veterans are and things like that. And so, we should only do each thing once, ideally. And then, participating collaboratively in, I'd like to see more like cross-sector efforts where state and federal departments are working together. That brings economies of scale. And then finally, for the philanthropic organizations, I think Jennifer talked this morning about like the time it takes to sort of procure, spin things up. One thing that we've noticed has been really successful is in-kind resources, where they're not giving us funding and then we have to go and do these types of things, but they're funding something that is very quick to start up because they're bringing in a partner that can already go there. And I think that can also keep us from doing a whole bunch of different versions of the same thing a whole bunch of different ways, because there can be funding on kind of a consistent, scalable, interoperable approach. And states usually have very limited positions, so it's hard to just add staff, especially staff that might only be there for 3 or 4 years. So by kind of adding on to our capacity of positions we don't have to fill, I think that's been a very successful model from our perspective.
Great, thank you for that. Before we go to Stephanie, so when you talk about kind of actionable guidance, is in a practical sense, is that, and again, talking to our funders out there, is that just about, getting clearer documentation? Is it about being able to get, technical assistance from the funders, or all of the above and some other things?
So on the technical assistance side, this is partially what I wanted to say, that, funding those areas on the fringes, so at the startup of these projects, the data sharing agreements, the legal negotiations, the technical infrastructure and knowledge, those are all really important and critical pieces of us being able to do this work and collaborating. So having that understanding toolkits around doing that work, helping us to streamline those efforts, bringing in your areas of expertise to help us better navigate those conversations. I think that, on the technical assistance side, from what we've experienced and what has been our biggest delays, would be really helpful. And then on the back end of the projects, we talked a little bit earlier today about turning that into policy impact. So we have this great work. What do we do with it? How do we speak to the real value of that work? Or are there technical assistance elements that philanthropic or other funders can bring in to help us move that conversation along? Because I think, coming from a university, we see a lot of research or funding opportunities for the research portion, that part in the middle. Everybody's really excited about the fun products work that we can do, but really getting to that point where we're able to do it, and then getting to that point where we have it and we're able to use it for policy impacts has been some of the harder work for us to navigate within New Jersey, at least.
Thank you for that. Mr. Putnam?
I think before talking about what we would like to see, I want to be clear that the role of the philanthropic organizations has been critical to this point. Philanthropic organizations were the ones that provided the seed money for the unemployment to reemployment portal. that put us in a position then to advocate with USDOL to hold a national training, much like Robert's doing now with the TANF and SNAP stuff. That then led to, we sort of took the learnings from that and pulled it forward into the UI Equity Grant. And that's just not an Illinois experience. We're now talking about 7, 8 states. We're talking about a capacity at Coleridge where we are learning daily how to better collaborate with one another. So that's kind of to date. From here forward, I think I would say jump in. I think we need to be ready to receive more fully what it is the organizations, whether it be the philanthropic organizations, our Fed partners, the professional associations. Again, I think that is the growth edge for this group. We have some expertise and experience with measure development. I'm going to say here publicly, I think that some of those organizations have a greater expertise on how to apply those to people and for us to understand better how to use those measures to impact people. That's what I see as a growth edge, and that, I think, will fund itself.
Great, thank you so much. I think Mr. Putnam closed the show for us. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Are there any questions for our esteemed panel? No? Oh, you just asked mine. Okay, I have one for you. So, artificial intelligence is in the news every day, in New Jersey especially. Kind of in the work that you do you see, and AI is probably going to affect us in ways that we can't even imagine at this point. Do you see any implications, challenges, solutions for the work that we do, or opportunities to kind of leverage AI and machine learning for data for the public good or the projects that you're working on? I know it's a curveball, but AI is in the news every day, so we have to address it.
And I see, AI is definitely helpful as another tool in our ever-evolving toolbox. It's constantly changing. We've been using variations of, machine learning, data mining, things like that for almost 20 years, but our capability is getting faster, and particularly with some of the newer LLMs and things like that, that can really help with the accessibility to the end user. But I think we're also trying to really think about the impact to the workforce. And it's going to require a decrease in the latency of information, an increase in the granular information to really understand down at the skills level how that's affecting things so we can respond in a timely manner.
Stephanie or Robert, any thoughts?
Just that it's something we're obviously thinking a lot about, and thinking about how we could utilize it in a way that is still maintaining the security of our systems, balancing those conversations, and again, using the collaboration of our other states who are also thinking about this. We know that it is being discussed every day, everywhere, and from the SLDS community, we've heard a lot of growing working groups and partnerships around how other states are utilizing it. So we've been involved in those conversations and are eager to kind of listen to how other states are getting involved in that work as well. But really, we see a huge value and understand that it's something we will need to continue to learn about and bring into the systems.
All right. Mr. Putnam, any thoughts?
In general, AI gives me a headache, but let me answer your question this way. We have developed a measure of financial stress, looking at what did an individual earn prior to their unemployment and what do they earn during unemployment. What if we were to take that measure and use AI to proactively identify individuals who might be eligible for additional public benefits based on that financial stress? Again, it goes back to me for thinking of the claimant as a user, and how do we intermediate that with a process?
Yeah, so what I'm also hearing is that, so with that, there could potentially be an opportunity to use this technology as an enabler for scaling, right? To do things that we don't have the capacity to do with just the researchers or staff that we have in the building, potentially. Okay.
And my follow-on with it, and I'm an AI researcher, so this is, I think we need to have more definition around AI, and that's one thing we're worried about in our state, that like to a lot of people, oh, AI would just, it emerged a year ago, and AI equals ChatGPT, and so I'm kind of screaming in my head that we really need to illustrate that full taxonomy of everything that AI is, and really break that down, and especially so that as we're making policies, we're not lumping everything in together, and that, we've got some good decision trees for information visualization. What do you do if it's time series, this and that? We're fully disambiguating what it means to use a very mature classification model, simulation, optimization, all of the wealth of things available in operations research and things like that, versus like GNI, LLMs, transfer learning, and things like that, so that we can be a little more specific about our policy, and that we've got that semantic interoperability as we're talking about this and as it continues to grow very quickly.
Great, thank you. A question in the back?
Yes, I'm Anna Hugh, and yesterday at the Multistate Data Collaboratives meeting, we had a fun kind of exercise. It was theme of the day with the letter P, which started with a big capital P for partnership, right? But I did raise during part of the conversation about the word perpetual. So, you're talking about AI, technology is going to continue to change, and I will throw another P in there, which is politics. So in every election cycle, every year, we're re-educating people about the value of data, right? So how do you, figure out how do we continue to share this message that all three of you are sharing, regardless of what the political tides bring at the local, state, federal levels? We're going to have to re-educate people, and so how do we make sure that they buy in to that value proposition that we all see in the room already, but we want to make sure that those influencers, decision makers, policy makers, and the funders out there really understand the value of the work that everybody's doing here.
So, we have a governor change coming up in the next couple of years, so we've been thinking a lot about this, and I was there for when he came into office, so familiar with the conversations that had to take place at that time, and again, to the benefit of not reinventing the wheel, the SLDS state support team has a lot of resources around making that value proposition, developing briefing materials that we've started to utilize to really just have better documentation around these conversations, so that we're prepared when those transitions start to happen. We already have all the resources available, and it's really about both showing the long-term relationships we've developed, the value of the system, and also the future potential of the system, and what kind of products we've been able to develop, and what we're working on, and what we know we're building towards, and just having documentation and resources to make those value propositions.
And as we were kind of standing up this new system, we paid attention to other states in history and who fared well or did not fare well during their transitions, and we really paid attention to Indiana, that got started with the executive order, but they always went back and followed it up in state code. So we I think we have legislation every regular session, sometimes multiple bills, making sure that anything that comes up, it gets codified. And we actually established a separate legislative committee that's the data sharing and data-driven decision-making legislative committee to make sure that we have our House and our Senate informed and participating, and so that gives us some sustainability and stability across. And we're a year into a new gubernatorial administration, but we made sure that early on during the transition period, we're communicating the value of data, but again, relevant to their priorities. This is how we can do that. This is how we can do it more efficiently and more effectively. Because, if you can talk about it in terms of we can help you meet your priorities, we can do it cheaper, we can do it faster. Because of these capabilities that state already has, then that turns it into an asset for their agenda.
Great. George, you give closing remarks? Everything you said. Great. Thank you so much. Give a round of applause to our panel. Great. Thank you, George, Robert, and Stefan.